I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped inside. The house was breathing differently. I came home earlier than planned, grocery bags cutting into my fingers, my body heavy with the kind of tired that sinks into your bones. I expected silence, the familiar quiet of a house that knows my routine. Instead, a sound floated down the hallway and stopped me cold. Laughter. Not loud. Not careless. Intimate. The kind of laughter that belongs behind closed doors, shared between people who think they're alone. I stood there, keys still in my hand, listening as if my body had moved faster than my mind. The air smelled warm, damp, unfamiliar. As I walked forward, I noticed steam creeping out from under the bathroom door, curling along the floor like a warning I didn't want to read. My chest tightened before my thoughts could catch up. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, not to be dramatic, not to let old fears rewrite the present. Families survive on trust, I reminded myself. Accusations destroy more than they heal. But instinct doesn't ask permission. Another sound slipped through the door. Water moving, skin brushing skin, a voice that didn't belong to solitude. I stopped just inches away, my breath shallow, my pulse loud enough that I was sure it could be heard inside. I pressed my palm lightly against the wall, grounding myself. "You're tired," I whispered under my breath. "You're imagining things." Yet my body refused to move away. Through the haze of steam leaking from the frame, I caught fragments of conversation. Low voice. Familiar laugh. Not playful. Comfortable. Practiced. My stomach dropped. I thought of my son, at work, believing in the life he was building. I thought of the years I'd spent swallowing my doubts for the sake of peace. Of how often I'd told myself silence was kindness. The bathroom light glowed beneath the door, bright and merciless. Shadows shifted inside. Someone moved closer to someone else. I leaned in despite myself. "Did you lock it?" a man's voice asked, casual and unconcerned. "Relax," she replied. Her voice, the one I knew too well. "No one's home." The words hit harder than any scream could have. I felt something inside me fracture, sharp and clean. Not grief yet. Not anger. Just a sudden, brutal clarity. This wasn't a mistake. This was comfort. Routine. My fingers curled around the doorknob before I realized what I was doing. The metal was warm, slick with condensation, alive beneath my skin. One turn. One step. That was all it would take. I imagined pushing the door open. A shock. A shouting. The irreversible damage of reacting too fast. I imagined my son's face when the truth reached him in pieces instead of purpose. The laughter inside softened again, careless, unaware of the reckoning standing just outside. My hand trembled. And then, at the last second, I stopped. Because some truths don't need to be seen to be known. And some plans can only be made in silence. I learned that day how long a second can last. And how cruel waiting can become. I didn't burst in after I stopped myself. I stood there, frozen, my hand still hovering near the handle, my breath shallow and controlled. The sounds behind the door continued, unaware of me, unbothered by the truth pressing its face against the frame. Time stretched. Seconds dragged themselves across the floor like something wounded. I told myself that if I waited, maybe the moment would undo itself. Maybe the door would open and nothing would be wrong. Maybe I would feel foolish for standing there, heart pounding, mind spiraling. Instead, the laughter softened. Water shut off. Footsteps moved closer. The lock clicked from the inside. The door opened only a fraction, just enough to let the steam escape in a sudden, choking wave. Warm air rushed past me, carrying the scent of soap, skin, and something deeply personal I would never forget. That was when I saw him. Not fully, not clearly, but clearly enough. Familiar jawline. A shoulder I had seen before in my own living room. A presence that belonged to this house in a way it never should have. My stomach turned violently. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't random. He wasn't some careless mistake picked up on a lonely night. He was someone I knew. And that knowledge cut deeper than the betrayal itself. The man froze when he saw me, his face still flushed, his eyes wide with panic. For a brief, humiliating second, none of us spoke. Steam curled between us like a lie trying to hide. Then my daughter-in-law stepped into view. Her face drained of color so quickly it startled me. The confidence I'd always seen in her, the practiced ease, the sharp tongue, the entitlement, collapsed in an instant. Her mouth opened, then closed again. No apology came. No explanation followed. A shock. "I can explain," she finally said, but the words sounded weak, already defeated. I didn't respond. I couldn't trust my voice not to shatter everything in that moment. She reached for the towel, clutching it tighter around herself, as if modesty could undo what I had already witnessed. Her eyes darted to the man behind her, silently urging him to disappear. He didn't move. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling now. "It's not what you think." That almost made me laugh. 'Cause it was exactly what I thought. Worse even. It was proof. Solid, undeniable proof standing barefoot on my bathroom tiles. I looked at him, then really looked. He avoided my eyes, staring at the floor like a child caught stealing. Cowardice clung to him more than the steam. "How long?" I asked quietly. Neither answered. Silence spilled out, thick and heavy, telling me everything words refused to say. My chest burned, but my face stayed still. I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold in front of me. The part of me that might have screamed, cried, or cursed had gone completely numb. I nodded once, slowly. "Get dressed," I said, my voice calm enough to frighten even myself. She stepped back instinctively, as if she didn't recognize the woman standing in front of her. I didn't wait for another lie. I didn't ask another question. I reached forward and closed the door. Gently, deliberately. The click of the latch echoed down the hallway like a final word. Then, without hesitation, I turned the lock from the outside and walked away. I didn't raise my voice. That terrified me more than screaming ever could. I walked away from the bathroom door without saying another word, my steps steady even though my hands were shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. Behind me, muffled voices rose in panic, but I didn't turn around. I didn't want to hear excuses echoing off tile and steam. The hallway felt longer than it ever had before. Each step carried the weight of what I had just seen, what I now knew could never be unknown again. My thoughts were sharp, slicing through years of denial, cutting straight to the truth I'd avoided for too long. I went into the kitchen and sat down slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile control I had left. The grocery bags slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. An apple rolled away, stopping beneath the table like it had chosen to hide. I didn't move to pick it up. I stared at my hands instead. They looked old, familiar. Steady hands that had cooked meals, signed documents, wiped tears. Hands that had just locked a door on a truth that refused to stay buried. The house was silent now, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant rush of water starting again upstairs. They were talking behind that door. Whispering. Planning. That realization made my jaw tighten. This wasn't panic born from a single mistake. This was the fear of people who had rehearsed lies before, who had done this often enough to know what came next. The truth settled into my bones slowly, heavily. This wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated, comfortable, repeated. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, memories lining up like pieces of a puzzle I'd refused to solve. Late nights, sudden errands, her irritation whenever I asked simple questions. The way she guarded her phone like it held her pulse. I had ignored so much in the name of peace. My son's face rose in my mind, clear and unguarded. The way he trusted easily. The way he believed effort could fix anything. I thought of the hours he worked, the dreams he postponed, the life he was building brick by brick, on ground that was already cracking. I swallowed hard. This house, I whispered to myself, the word heavy with history. It wasn't just walls and furniture. It was sacrifice. It was money saved instead of spent, comfort delayed instead of enjoyed. It was a promise I had made to keep this place safe, steady, unbroken. And now it had been used as a hiding place. A sound echoed faintly from upstairs, a knock on the door from inside. Soft at first, then louder. "Please," my daughter-in-law called, her voice strained. "Open the door." I didn't answer. Another knock. More urgent. "We can talk about this," she said. "You don't understand." I opened my eyes and stared at the clock on the wall. The second hand moved smoothly, indifferent to everything unraveling in this house. Explain. Misunderstand. I had heard all those words before, just never aimed at me like this. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. A message from my son, cheerful and ordinary, asking if I'd be home for dinner. I stared at his name until the screen dimmed. My throat burned. If I acted now, if I stormed upstairs, if I called him immediately, if I let anger speak, I knew exactly what would happen. Voices would rise. Stories would change. Truth would blur into emotion. And emotion could be manipulated. I realized something then, sitting alone in that kitchen with betrayal pressing down on me like a weight. Silence wasn't weakness. Silence was a weapon. Behind the bathroom door, the knocking stopped. The house held its breath. Somewhere deep inside, something hardened, not into cruelty but into resolve. I stood up slowly. I wasn't ready to react. I was ready to think. And for the first time since I stepped into that house, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Acting on emotion would be a mistake. So I decided not to. I learned something painful in that quiet kitchen. This house had never been hers. I stayed seated for a long time, staring at the familiar cracks in the table, the faded wood polished by decades of use. The silence pressed in, but it didn't feel empty. It felt crowded with memories, with decisions I had made long before she ever walked through the front door. This house had a history. It had my history. I remembered signing papers with tired hands after double shifts, choosing mortgages over vacations, stability over indulgence. I remembered my late spouse sitting beside me, hopeful, whispering dreams about a place where our family would always be safe. We built this house with restraint, with sacrifice, with intention. Every wall carried compromise. Every room held a choice we had made instead of something easier. I knew every document tied to this place because I had guarded them the way people guard heirlooms. Ownership wasn't accidental. Neither was inheritance. I rose from the kitchen chair and walked slowly through the living room, my fingers brushing the back of the sofa. The furniture wasn't expensive, but it was earned. Nothing in this house existed by chance. She had never understood that. I remembered her laughing once years ago, when she saw me organizing files at the dining table. "You're so old-fashioned," she said, smiling like it was harmless. "Who even keeps paper copies anymore?" I smiled back then. I didn't explain. She mistook silence for ignorance. I had listened to her jokes about tradition, about people who cling too tightly to what they think they own. I had watched her dismiss boundaries as weakness, caution as fear. And I had said nothing. Now, standing alone in the hallway, those conversations replayed themselves with new meaning. Comments that once felt casual now revealed sharp edges. Questions she asked too carefully. Curiosity disguised as boredom. She had been measuring this house long before she betrayed it. I stopped outside the study and turned on the light. The room glowed softly, illuminating shelves of binders and folders neatly labeled in my handwriting. I hadn't opened some of them in years, but I knew exactly where everything was. I pulled one binder free and placed it on the desk. My hands stopped trembling. Inside were documents layered with time. Deeds, clauses, signatures made when trust still felt simple. I flipped through slowly, each page grounding me further. This house was protected. Not by locks, by foresight. My daughter-in-law had believed comfort meant ownership. That marriage automatically granted permanence. That smiling at dinners and sharing holidays gave her claim to everything under this roof. She was wrong. I remembered a conversation with my spouse late one night, both of us exhausted, discussing what would happen if life went wrong. People changed. Love failed. Put it in writing, my spouse had said softly. Just in case. So I did. I traced my finger along the edge of the page, stopping at the section I had nearly forgotten myself. A clause written plainly, without drama, designed not for revenge, but for protection. Covered residency. Conduct. Trust. At the time it felt unnecessary. Almost pessimistic. Now it felt prophetic. I sat down at the desk, letting the chair creak beneath me, and allowed myself one long breath. For the first time since that bathroom door opened, I felt steady. Not cruel. Not vengeful. Prepared. I realized then that love without boundaries becomes permission. That kindness without clarity invites exploitation. I had confused patience with peace for far too long. I looked around the study, at the framed photo of my spouse, at the quiet order of the room, and felt a calm resolve settle in. This house had survived loss, grief, and time. It would survive this too. There was a strange comfort in knowing that while people could lie, paper could not. Ink did not bend to charm or tears. It simply told the truth, waiting patiently to be acknowledged. I told myself I wasn't planning revenge. I was restoring balance, protecting what had been entrusted to me. Sometimes, love meant standing firm when others expected softness. I sat there a moment longer, listening to the house breathe around me, as if it too remembered every promise ever made within its walls. I thought of all the times she had spoken over me, corrected me, treated my caution like a flaw. "You worry too much," she once said, rolling her eyes. Life doesn't work that way anymore. But life had worked exactly that way. Low, predictable, unforgiving. I thought of my son again, of how easily he trusted, how he assumed love guaranteed honesty. I wondered how long she had believed this house would eventually become hers through patience alone. Upstairs I heard movement, a door opening, footsteps pacing. The house carried sound differently when secrets were exposed, every creak amplified, every breath heavy. Someone knocked faintly from above. She started, then stopped herself. I didn't answer. I closed the binder slowly, the leather cover pressing flat beneath my palm. The decision settled inside me, quiet and firm, like a door locking somewhere deep in my chest. She had mocked my caution. She had underestimated my patience. And she had never bothered to read the fine print. Not legally. Ever. Because if she had, she would have known. This house was never hers. I used to believe love excused everything. Tonight I finally understood how wrong that belief had been. I leaned back in the study chair, the binder still warm beneath my palm, and let memories of their marriage rise uninvited. It hadn't begun with violence or chaos, but with speed, charm, and a constant pressure to move faster than caution allowed. I remembered the rushed vows, the tight smiles, the way questions were brushed aside as negativity. Everyone told me to be happy for them, so I swallowed my unease and called it support. My son had always been gentle, eager to please, convinced compromise was proof of love. I watched her redirect him subtly, correcting his words, deciding plans, laughing when he hesitated. At the time, I told myself that was just marriage, that power always settled unevenly. But sitting there now, with betrayal documented in ink and memory, the pattern sharpened painfully. The man in the bathroom wasn't an accident or temptation. He was evidence. Evidence of loneliness cultivated, boundaries softened, and entitlement quietly encouraged. I thought of holidays where my son sat silent while she spoke for him. I thought of decisions announced to him instead of discussed, futures framed as favors. Each memory felt small alone, harmless enough to excuse. Together, they formed a slow betrayal I had witnessed without naming. I stood and walked through the living room, seeing their wedding photo with new eyes. My son's smile was open. Hers was measured, almost victorious. How many times had I mistaken confidence for love, control for commitment? A knock echoed faintly from upstairs, followed by her voice, cautious now. "Please," she said. "We need to talk." I didn't answer because I finally understood that conversations had always favored her. Talking sooner would only protect the story she wanted told. My phone buzzed softly on the desk, vibrating against the wood like a heartbeat. My son's name lit up the screen, bright and ordinary. "Hey Mom," his message read. "Just checking in." I imagined his smile, unaware, untouched by what waited above him. My thumb hovered over the screen, heavy with truth I wasn't ready to release. If I answered now, everything would collapse at once. He deserved better than chaos delivered without preparation. So I turned the phone face down and let it go silent. Waiting doesn't just reveal truth. It reshapes the person who is forced to wait. I didn't unlock the bathroom door right away. I let time stretch until it bent everyone inside it, including me. Minutes turned into hours, and with every tick of the clock, my anger cooled into something sharper, more deliberate. Time became my ally. I made tea I didn't drink. I wiped a counter that was already clean. I moved through the house like a guest in my own life, listening to the muffled sounds upstairs fade into silence. At some point, even their whispers stopped. They were waiting now too. Waiting changes people. It strips away bravado and leaves only need. I knew that because I felt it working on me, sanding down the shock, polishing my resolve. When I finally walked back upstairs, the hallway felt colder. The light outside the bathroom was still on, casting a thin line beneath the door. I stood there for a moment, steadying my breath, then turned the lock. The click echoed louder than it should have. The door opened slowly. They stepped out one at a time, wrapped in fear instead of towels. The man avoided my eyes completely. His shoulders hunched. His confidence evaporated. He looked smaller than he had hours ago, like someone who finally understood the cost of being seen. My daughter-in-law followed, her face tight, jaw clenched as if holding herself together took physical effort. Panic had replaced arrogance. The woman who once filled rooms now shrank in the hallway. She spoke first. "Please," she said quickly. "This isn't what it looks like." I didn't respond. "It's been stressful," she continued, words spilling out too fast. "You know how things have been lately. Your son's always busy. I've been alone so much." I watched her carefully, noting how she never said his name, how she never looked at the man beside her. "It was a misunderstanding," she added. "Nothing serious." The man shifted uncomfortably. "I should go," he muttered. "Yes," I said calmly. "You should." He flinched at my tone, then grabbed his things without another word. The front door opened and closed moments later, the sound final and clean. Silence rushed back in. My daughter-in-law exhaled shakily, as if relieved the worst part was over. She stepped closer, eyes glossy, voice softer now. "You don't understand how lonely I've been," she said. "I didn't plan this. It just happened." I met her gaze, unblinking. "Loneliness doesn't unlock doors," I replied. "People do." She swallowed hard. "You don't know what it's like," she insisted. "Your son doesn't listen. He's always tired." I felt invisible. I nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement that she believed her own story. "I listened," I said quietly. "I listened for hours." That unsettled her. She had expected yelling, tears, accusations. Calm was unfamiliar territory, and it showed. Her hands trembled as she tried another approach. "Please," she whispered. "Let's not make this worse than it already is." Worse. As if this were a stain that could be scrubbed out. I gestured toward the living room. "Sit." She hesitated, then obeyed. The power shift was subtle, but undeniable. I sat across from her, folding my hands in my lap, feeling grounded for the first time since that afternoon. "I want you to understand something," I said evenly. "I'm not angry right now." Her eyes widened slightly. "That doesn't mean I'm unaware," I continued. "Or confused. Or willing to forget." She opened her mouth to interrupt, but I raised a hand gently. "I waited," I said. "Because waiting shows patterns. It shows who panics, who plans, who assumes forgiveness will arrive without consequences. Her face flushed. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she said quickly. I swear. Intent doesn't erase impact. I almost said it out loud, but decided silence would teach her more. The clock ticked loudly on the wall between us. She fidgeted, brushing at imaginary lint, searching for the version of me she used to manage so easily. You're always so understanding, she said, trying once more. I thought. That's where you made your mistake, I replied. She froze. I was understanding, I said. Not unobservant. Her composure cracked then. Tears welled, her voice shaking. What are you going to do? That was the first honest question she'd asked all evening. I stood slowly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. She watched me like a verdict was being written across my face. I'm going to give you time, I said. The same way I took mine. She looked hopeful for a second. Time to pack, I added. Her breath caught. You should pack a bag tonight. The words landed heavy and final, hanging in the air between us. She stared at me, stunned, as if she'd just realized that waiting had changed more than just me. Paper cuts deeper than words ever could. And truth bleeds quietly. I went back to the study after telling her to pack, my steps unhurried, my pulse steady. The house felt alert now, as if it knew something irreversible was unfolding inside its walls. I closed the door behind me and let the quiet settle. This was the part she never imagined. I opened the cabinet beneath the desk and pulled out the second binder, the one tucked behind old tax folders and warranty manuals. It wasn't dramatic or hidden behind locks. It was simply there, waiting like consequences always are. I laid the papers out slowly, page by page, smoothing the corners the way I always had. Ownership records, residency terms, legal notes written in clear language, stripped of emotion. There was no anger in ink, only intention. When I returned to the living room, she was standing near the couch, her packed bag half-zipped at her feet. She straightened when she saw the folder in my hands. What's that? She asked, trying for casual and failing. Information, I said. I sat down and motioned for her to do the same. She hesitated, then lowered herself onto the edge of the chair, tense and guarded. You don't need to do this, she said quickly. We can handle this privately. I opened the binder. This is private, I replied calmly. Just not secret. Her eyes tracked the movement of the pages, her breathing shallow now. I watched comprehension flicker and fade as she realized this wasn't a lecture. It was a record. This house, I began, is not marital property. Her head snapped up. What? It never was, I continued. And it never would be. She shook her head slightly, confusion turning to irritation. That's not how it works. Live here. I'm married to your son. Residency is conditional, I said, tapping the page lightly. Always has been. Her mouth opened, then closed again. I turned another page. These conditions were agreed upon before you ever moved in, I said. Before you ever unpacked a box. Her confidence cracked audibly. She leaned forward, scanning the text, her finger tracing lines she'd never bothered to read. I saw the moment the truth reached her. Not emotionally, but practically. Paper doesn't argue back. You can't just, she started then stopped. This isn't fair. Fairness isn't the issue, I said. Accuracy is. She looked up at me then, really looked, as if seeing a stranger sitting across from her. The version of me she'd dismissed for years, the quiet one, the cautious one, was gone. In its place was someone she couldn't interrupt. This clause, I said, pointing carefully, ties continued residency to conduct. Her face drained again. Conduct. Fidelity, I clarified. Transparency. Respect for the household. She swallowed hard. You planned this, she whispered. No, I said evenly. I prepared for it. The distinction mattered. She pushed back in her chair, standing abruptly. You're trying to scare me. I met her gaze without blinking. I don't need to. Her hands trembled now, the bag at her feet suddenly insignificant. She had always believed control came from volume, from certainty, from dominating conversations. None of that worked on documents. "You can't do this without him," she said, grasping for leverage. "He wouldn't agree to this." "I don't need his agreement," I replied. "Only his awareness." That word landed hard. She paced once, then stopped, facing me again. "You're enjoying this," she accused quietly. I shook my head. "I'm enduring it." There was a difference, and she could feel it. I thought of the years I'd kept these papers untouched, hoping they'd never be needed. I hadn't built this shield to hurt anyone. I'd built it because people change when they think nothing can touch them. She looked smaller now, stripped of assumptions she'd worn like armor. "So what happens now?" she asked. I closed the binder slowly. "Now," I said, "you leave tonight." Her breath hitched. "And your son?" I stood, gathering the papers back into my arms, the weight of them grounding me. She searched my face, panic breaking through calculation. "Does he know?" she asked. I paused at the doorway, the answer already decided. "He will." I broke my son's heart without raising my voice. That was the cruelest part. I called him the next morning, after the house had emptied of tension but not of consequence. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, like it belonged to someone else who knew how to do hard things without falling apart. "Can you come by?" I said. "I need to talk to you." He arrived an hour later, smiling, coffee in hand, unaware that the ground beneath him had already cracked. He hugged me the way he always did, quick, familiar, trusting, and that nearly undid me. "You okay?" he asked, glancing around the house. "It's quiet." He nodded. "Sit down." He noticed then. The stillness, the absence, the way the air felt heavier than usual. He set the coffee down slowly, concern creeping into his eyes. "Where is she?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I sat across from him, folding my hands together, anchoring myself to the moment. This was the point of no return. "I need you to listen," I said. "All the way through." He frowned slightly but nodded. "Okay." I didn't soften the truth. I didn't dramatize it either. I laid it down between us like something fragile and sharp, something that could cut if handled too quickly. "I came home early yesterday," I began. "I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. I saw something I can't unsee." His brow furrowed. "Mom." "She wasn't alone," I said quietly. The words hung there, suspended, refusing to land. He shook his head once, sharply. "No. I waited," I continued. "I confirmed it. I recognized him." Silence swallowed the room. His jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists against his thighs. "That's not possible," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded wrong even to him. "You must have misunderstood." I met his eyes and held them. "I didn't." His denial broke before his heart did. I could see it happen, the moment disbelief lost its grip and fear rushed in to take its place. "Who?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Told him." He leaned back in the chair as if struck, staring at the ceiling, breathing unevenly. The structure he had built, trust, routine, belief, began collapsing silently, beam by beam. "How long?" he whispered. "I don't know," I said. "Long enough." He covered his face with his hands. "This doesn't make sense." "It does," I replied gently. "Just not in the way you wanted it to." Minutes passed. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just sat there, unraveling quietly, like someone watching their life play out without their consent. "I loved her," he said finally, the words heavy and stunned. "I did everything right." "I know," I said. "That's why this hurts." He looked at me then, eyes glassy, searching for escape. "Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she didn't mean." "I didn't come to you with maybes," I said softly. That stopped him. I told him about the waiting, about the locked door, about the calm explanations that avoided responsibility. I told him what she said and what she didn't. I told him she packed a bag. His head snapped up. You made her leave. I gave her time, I said. She chose how to use it. He stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged thought. You should have called me. I should have been there. You weren't ready, I replied. And neither was I. He stopped pacing and turned toward me, anger flickering briefly through the grief. This is my marriage. I know, I said. That's why I protected what was mine to protect. He stared at me, confused now. What does that mean? Took a breath. It means this didn't begin yesterday. And it won't end with feelings alone. He sank back into the chair, exhaustion settling over him. I don't even know what to do. You don't have to, I said. Not yet. We sat there together, mother and son, surrounded by the quiet aftermath of trust breaking. I watched him grieve not just the woman he married, but the future he imagined. After a long while he spoke again. You said you recognized him. Yes. And you waited. Yes. He nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place. You planned. I prepared, I corrected. He looked at me with a mixture of pain and respect, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. There's more, isn't there? I hesitated, then stood. There is. I walked to the study and returned with the binder, setting it gently on the table between us. The sound it made felt final. What's that? He asked. I slid it toward him. The truth doesn't end with what I saw. He stared at the folder, then up at me. Can I see it? He nodded. Of course, I said. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet that hurts the most. I watched her sit across from me at the kitchen table, her posture tight, her hands gripping the edge like it was a lifeline. The binder of documents lay open between us, its pages a silent army I didn't need to fight for me. She had believed control came from charm, from being the center of attention, from assuming silence meant agreement. She had been wrong. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call names. I let the papers speak, the ink laying bare what she had ignored for too long. Do you understand now? I asked softly. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The weight of reality pressed down on her, heavier than any argument or pleading could. The man you brought here, I continued, my voice even, is gone. Her eyes flicked toward the doorway, but it was empty. Just as he had vanished from our lives, so too had the illusion she had carried with him. I didn't think, she started, faltering. You never think when you act for comfort, I said quietly. You only act. She tried to meet my gaze, but her eyes darted nervously around the room, searching for allies in a space where none existed. My son sat nearby, silent, his presence no longer naive. He had seen, he had read, he had understood. Everything you assumed about this house, about me, about him, I gestured toward my son, was wrong. Her lips pressed together. She had underestimated every boundary I had set, every rule written in black and white, every consequence I had patiently prepared. I thought you would forgive, she whispered, voice breaking. I'm not here to forgive, I said. I'm here to protect. The binder trembled slightly in her hands as she flipped through the pages again, realizing for the first time the depth of the mistakes she had made. Ownership, residency, conduct, all written clearly, all undeniable. She exhaled sharply, her composure crumbling, and I felt no satisfaction. Only clarity. She had to see reality to survive it, not for revenge but for truth. Do you understand the conditions now? Yes. She nodded, but the nod was mechanical, hollow. She could see it. The lines of control had shifted. The tables had turned. And it wasn't about anger or yelling. It was about authority, the quiet power of preparation and patience. I have to leave, she said finally. Her voice was small, almost a confession. Yes, I said softly. You have to respect the terms. She looked down at the papers again, tracing her finger over her obligations, her privileges, her mistakes. Then she picked up a pen I had placed beside the binder, hesitating. Her hand shook as she signed. The sound of ink scratching paper echoed in the kitchen, louder than any shouting could have been. She signed something she never thought she would. And I watched her eyes fill with the bitter weight of understanding. The reality she had ignored for years was now unalterable. I remained calm, letting her digest it. Letting her see the consequences of every choice she had made. The ripple effects of every lie she thought she could hide. The man from the bathroom had vanished. The illusions of control had vanished. And she was left with nothing but the truth. As she set the pen down, a deep, quiet resolve settled over the house. The confrontation was over. But I knew this was just the beginning of how we would rebuild. Silence can carry more weight than anger. And justice doesn't always shout. The house felt different after she left. Lighter somehow, but bruised. Every corner seemed to breathe easier. And yet the walls held the memory of what had passed. I walked through the room slowly, noticing the faint scent of perfume she hadn't washed away, the subtle marks of presence now absent. My son sat in the living room, staring blankly at the floor. His grief wasn't for what he lost, but for what he thought he had. The life he imagined with her, a future built on trust, had been an illusion, and that realization weighed heavier than anger. I wondered if I had acted out of revenge. The thought surprised me. Every step I took, every paper I revealed, every calm word spoken had been carefully measured. But as I watched him, I realized my motives were not cruelty. Protection had guided me more than vengeance. I poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to him without speaking. He accepted it quietly, the steam curling in the soft morning light, filling the silence between us. Words weren't necessary. Healing would take time, but the first step was still the quiet presence of truth. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. I thought of the hours I had spent preparing, waiting, watching. Every moment had been deliberate. Every pause had been a choice. The house seemed to hold its own judgment, neutral but aware, as if it had witnessed everything without preference. He finally spoke, voice low and fragile. "Do you think she'll understand?" "I don't know," I said. "Some people never do." He nodded, staring into his cup. I could see the gears turning in his mind, the reckoning of trust, of love, of the life he thought he had built. It was silent, devastating, and final in its own way. I leaned back against the counter, letting the calm wash over me. The sun hit the window just right, casting long shadows across the floor, highlighting dust motes that floated like memories. That's when I saw it. Something small, forgotten, tucked beneath the couch cushion where she had once curled up. Note. Her handwriting, careful but rushed, stared back at me. I picked it up slowly, the paper crinkling under my fingers. The words were brief, almost an apology, almost a justification, but mostly a reflection of someone who realized too late how fragile control can be. I read it once, twice, feeling the weight of her attempt to leave something behind. Not just possessions, but a trace of herself. And I realized that even in her absence, the house still held fragments of the past, reminders that justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, waits, and leaves lessons hidden in quiet corners. I folded the note, letting it sit in my hand, knowing it was the final piece of a chapter one hadn't wanted to write, but had to. The house was lighter, but it still bruised. The handle clicked, and nothing would ever be the same. But it wasn't anger that guided my hand. It was clarity. I remember the weight of the key in my palm, the steam curling out from beneath the door, the laughter that froze my blood. I didn't burst in. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I simply waited, letting the world contract around that small space. Some betrayals demand patience, not rage. I sat outside the bathroom, heart hammering, hands trembling, and realized that acting on impulse would have given power to the wrong person. The truth needed room to reveal itself. I needed time to understand it fully. That pause, every second of it, was more deliberate than any confrontation could have been. It wasn't cruelty. It was observation. Control doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits, silent, watching, knowing the moment it will matter most. I replay the scene constantly. The door cracking open, the faces frozen in panic, the steam lifting like smoke from a fire that could not be hidden. I remember closing it, the click of the latch resonating louder than words. That moment wasn't destruction. It was exposure. I didn't destroy a marriage. I exposed a lie. And in exposing it, I didn't seek revenge. I sought truth. I sought clarity for my son, for myself, for this house that carried decades of history. Each choice I made that day was measured, deliberate, and necessary. Sitting alone now in the quiet house, I let myself breathe. The walls still remembered, but the air felt lighter. I traced my fingers over the surfaces that had witnessed so much. The table where I had poured coffee for decades, the shelves lined with books I had read and reread, the chairs worn from years of family gatherings. I forgive myself for waiting. I forgive myself for watching. I forgive myself for being silent when it would have been easier to scream. Because the door I locked that day, it wasn't the bathroom. It was my silence. And that silence saved more than it destroyed.